Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
With Venezuela in shambles, criminals and insurgents run large stretches of the nation's territory. The New York Times traveled through one of the regions under their control and wrote an in-depth piece describing what they found. And folks, it's bad news. And in the South American area, will Peru get on the Marxist path? So today we're looking at a lot of things happening in our backyard, per se, in the United States backyard. The question is, why haven't you probably heard about these things? And also, what do we need to do about them? The situation's pretty severe. Does it make any difference to your life? Should you care about what's happening? And I hate to break it to you, but the answer is yes. We hope that you do care about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be spending a whole show on it here. But we're going to try to give you some reasons why and explain a little bit more in depth about how this links to a show that we just did not that long ago. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on the geopolitical landscape in Venezuela and Peru and other areas of South and Central America without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, if you were like me, you didn't know what was going on. Well, you kind of knew what was going on. You didn't realize the severity of it. And you might be able to make the connection as to why it's important. But we're going to try to maybe show you in a couple of ways why it's important that you hadn't thought of. Word of the day is misfeasance. Now, some of you may have heard the word malfeasance, but this is misfeasance, M-I-S-F-E-A-S-A-N-C-E. It is a noun. It is the doing of a lawful act in an unlawful or improper manner so that there is an infringement on the rights of another or others. Okay? So what we have here in these articles as you read them is you have terrorist groups as classified by the United States going in and establishing law and order in a lawless area. And that's why this is our word of the day, a misfeasance. Again, doing of a lawful act in an unlawful or improper manner. So they're establishing themselves as the leader of an area where the government has disappeared. And in doing so, they are trying criminals, jailing criminals, protecting people, but they don't have the right to do that. Misfeasance.
Part of understanding what's happening in Venezuela dates back a few years, 2012, 2013, when their economy started to fall apart. Okay, because this is the essence of understanding how we arrived at this point. Because by a lot of measures, up until that point, Venezuela was probably one of the better South American countries in terms of its advanced, quote unquote, advanced level of society. There are aspects of everyday life that maybe many of us would be familiar with where there weren't necessarily a lot of other South American countries that you could say the same of. Didn't mean there weren't still issues, but they were showing maybe some signs of moving in the right direction. And then things kind of started to fall apart with the economy. And the long story short is it's only gotten worse since then. The government has slowly been basically abandoning parts of its own country because they no longer have the ability to maintain control in those areas. And even in the areas in which they, quote unquote, maintain control, the people for which the government supposedly works don't trust the government because the government regularly takes advantage of its own people. So you've got several different issues going on, and that's to say nothing to mention the corruption of the head of Venezuela and those issues in and of themselves, and possible election fraud and, all kinds of good things. But just at a core level, it's the government's just basically wholly abandoned certain parts of its own country. It is not present, not taking care of anything. And in the areas that it does still exist, it regularly takes advantage of its own people. So its people don't trust the government. Compound on top of that, Lance, right? A basically devastated economy where just 10 years ago, there may have been prospects for young people to actually get decent careers and work in fields that we would recognize as modern jobs are gone. I mean, it's gone backwards, right? The country's almost moving in reverse at a accelerating pace, it seems like.
To fill in some of the blanks there, you talk about the economy. The economy was based on oil. And so when the oil market went haywire, as it has been for the last 7 or 8 years, the economy of Venezuela fell apart. And then you had malfeasance. You had, as you said, the government misrepresenting itself and taking bribes and doing things illegal and not protecting people because they were trying to make money when the oil market went bad, to the point, as the article makes, Venezuelans used to, who are on the border to Colombia, used to cross over and take oil and gasoline into Colombia because they could get it so cheaply in Venezuela and weren't much of a border control there, to the point now that the economy is so bad and so little oil is produced that now people come from Colombia and smuggle gasoline into these western and northwestern provinces of Venezuela because the government can't get the oil to its own citizens. And so you have this malfeasance of the government now being represented and turned into by the misfeasance of these terrorist groups or people who are raiding from Colombia to give some kind of rule over this Wild West part where the government has just walked away because President Maduro still has an army and he still controls the major metropolitan areas, but that's all he has the power to control in Venezuela. And so if you are living in the outskirts, if you are living in the wilds of Venezuela, if you were living, let's say, between the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains of the United States, you basically have been left on your own. The government's kind of just washed its hands of you and walked away. And so whatever goes on, and you have to protect yourself. And in many cases, you don't have that ability. So villages have been destroyed. There are pictures where there was one organization, illegal organization, who comes in and not only destroys your home, but takes the roof off your home so that you can't come back in and establish it. Meaning they just don't tear down the walls, but they tear down the roof. And so there's no structure left and you can't move back in. And they just randomly shoot, to the point that there was so much gunfire that pet parrots in the region made the gunfiring sound because they heard it so often. And so then outside groups came in, and this is where that's the malfeasance. The misfeasance is, well, outside groups come in and say, you know what? We'll protect you. We'll try those people who murdered your son, murdered your husband, and we'll execute them or throw them in jail. Now all you have to do is work for us. And people looking for some kind of solidarity and some kind of structure say, okay. So we then say, well, oh my gosh, how come these people became terrorists or part of a terrorist organization? Well, it's because their government abandoned them. And then some people will even go so far as, well, their government abandoned them because the United States abandoned the government of Venezuela. Are you a conservative, a middle of the road, or a progressive? There's plenty of blame to go around.
Everybody, right? And that's the part of the reason I would contend that we're not hearing more about this, is because nobody wants to admit that a large part of it's our fault. You know, is it all our fault? Of course not. I mean, you know, some of this is, well, we shouldn't have ever been needed in the first place because they should have had, you know, yada. Okay. But we decided to help, and then we kind of quit helping, and then things got really bad. And now everybody's all concerned about our border crisis. And it's like, well, we have a border crisis in part because people are leaving the countries that we were helping make better. And then surprise, when those countries went to hell in a handbasket, the people didn't want to stay anymore.
And we as a country abandoned them and quit helping them because either A, we couldn't help their economy, or B, we didn't like their leader, like in the case of Venezuela, because he became a little too Marxist and communist and a little bit right wing and allied himself with people that we didn't like. So we said, fine, we're going to put economic sanctions on you. And he said, fine, you can't tell me what to do. And the people that suffered weren't the president that we put the sanctions on, but the people of the country who then are like, well, we have to leave this country. Well, let's go to the United States because life is better there. There you go. We put the economic sanctions on the political group who decided to stay in power and said, okay, no political sanctions on me. I just won't give my people anything.
And that's how we arrive at where we're at now, because as we mentioned, Venezuela was one of the better South American countries. And again, this is relative here, folks. Doesn't mean it was good, okay, but it was heading in a net positive direction. How about that? Okay, there were some progress being made in terms of modernizing society, some actual democratic-esque reforms underway. And so by standards of South America, it looked to be possibly a decent place. But then when things got bad, it's like, well, everywhere else would be as bad or worse. So the only place to go is north, right? I mean, we have no financial means as it is because the economy tanked and now our Venezuelan money is worth nothing. So, on top of the fact that we had no money to start with, the money that we do have isn't worth anything now anyway. So we've got all these massive issues, and then our government makes it worse because they don't know what they're doing. So our currency is further devalued. So now our money's worth even less. It's basically worth as much as dirt, and so we have literally no money, didn't have any to start with, but now we have even less because it's not worth anything. And so like sailing to other countries, that's not in the wheelhouse. The only option is to migrate via land where you can walk, ride, sneak. That's it, because they don't have anything else. So, well, the only place that's really better, right, is Mexico or the United States. And if you're going to go all the way to Mexico, you might as well try to make it to the promised land, right? I mean, it's kind of like at that point, because we always complain, in this country and talk a lot about the issues of Mexico not stopping stuff, but they have big problems of their own, right? We'll just put them back over the border. It's like, well, that just offloads the problem on Mexico because a lot of the people in Mexico are there in Mexico illegally. They're not Mexicans. They're coming from South America and they made it into Mexico and they weren't supposed to make it in there. And Mexico's dealing with an illegal immigration problem. And then they, transition from Mexico into the United States and on it goes. And I guess the point here that we're trying to get at is the problem, we bear some of the responsibility for this. If we don't like the immigration issue that we're facing, part of this is a direct result of our failures in South America. We've got more to talk about, though. So what do we do about this? And what's happening in Peru? Is all hope lost? Well, those are questions we're going to attempt to answer. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
5,000 flee as Venezuela launches largest military campaign in decades. So we talked about, basically the government's given up. Well, it looked like they'd given up, Lance, and then all of a sudden they decide to start this massive military escapade against one of these groups that they had tolerated basically for years. And so now people are confused, right? Because it's like, wait a minute. There's all these other groups and you're not doing anything about them. And now you've targeted this one. And so now you got people fleeing, right? Thousands, literally, of people fleeing on top of the ones that were already leaving. So it's a big mess. And that's part of what we tried to highlight in the beginning of the show. But some of this has to do with we pulled back our aid and now we're stuck with the results. Peru's a little bit of a different situation, though. What's happening there, Lance? What's going on?
In Peru, what you have is you have a presidential race where neither candidate looks like they would be a good choice.
And voting's mandatory.
Right. So pick your poison. You have a person who is involved in all kinds of political and economic scandal who is trailing. And the front runner is giving the good old communist talk of Lenin and Marx, to a country that has historically been poor. And the government's going to use its power to take away all of the land holdings of the aristocracy and give it to the peasants. We've seen this play out all over the world in the last 75 years. And so those are your choices, in a country that is on the Pacific coast of South America in the north, but on the west coast of South America. And so again, now here's your choice, right? You have to vote. You vote for a Marxist Leninist speaker, or you vote for someone who is corrupt, in dirty dealings with politics below the presidential level. So the odds are that if they get to be president, they would do the same thing on a broader scale because they'd have more power. Not much of a choice. Many of us thought that in the last couple of presidential elections here in the United States, we didn't have much of a choice. Take it between a communist and a known embezzler and fraudulent economic practices. And those are your two choices. And oh, by the way, as Justin said, you have to go to the polls and vote.
Right. Yeah. This isn't the United States where you can just stay home.
Right. You don't have option C of, well, I just won't vote and I'll let the minority make the decision, which, unfortunately, historically, we've done in the United States for most of the last half of the 20th century and the early 21st century, which hey, we saw a change. That's good, right? I mean, if you've listened to this show nigh on 10 years now, you know that we're all about voting. But I'm not too sure that we're on board with making voting mandatory. That's one we might be talked about a little bit once or twice in the last 10 years, but yours truly is pretty much against the government mandating just about anything. So people should have the freedom to choose, but I would be hard pressed to choose in Peru who I would vote for. Maybe Donald Duck, like I did in 6th grade. I voted for Donald Duck in 6th grade. In the 6th grade election, it was George McGovern versus Richard Nixon, and I voted for Donald Duck. And the teacher found out that I was the one who voted for Donald Duck, and I was the only vote for Donald Duck, and I was suspended. So at least, for the afternoon.
Right. So here's the thing I guess I would mention with both of these, right? And the articles are linked at thestateofus.org. Peru is another case in point of Central South American countries, right, that has attracted actually some capital and made a little headway.
By the way, Donald Duck would have been a better choice than McGovern or Richard Nixon. I think my candidate should have gotten more respect.
Yeah. Should have received more than one vote.
Just a historical note there. Sorry to interrupt.
No. Important footnote. But Peru has made some headway in actually turning things around, by reducing some poverty, significant gains there, pursuing some stable fiscal policy, bringing inflation down, and actually propping up open markets over the last 20 years or so. So there's actually been some positive signs, but now this comes along, right? And it's kind of like, man, this is bad and worse, right? It's like, what are you going to choose? And in that sense, it is similar to what's going on in Venezuela, again, of our abdication of responsibility toward South America. And you might say, well, we don't bear any responsibility towards South America. Okay, but this is another one of those, let's just say for a moment, right, that we're heartless as a
Monroe
nation.
Doctrine, Roosevelt Corollary.
Yeah.
Alliance for Progress. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, there's historical references there, folks, if I'm misspeaking here, that since the 1820s, the United States has been involved in through the 1980s, we've been involved in Central and South America. The Sandinistas, Reagan, come on, folks, get with the program. We've always been involved in Central and South America.
Even if you don't care about the humanitarian part, right? Just set that aside, which is not an easy thing to do because frankly, I would hope that that's where most of us are focused, but let's just be cold-hearted, purely strategic individuals here for a moment. If we don't manage South America on some level, who do you think's going to? Well, China and Russia would be happy to. They would be very happy to do that. And they are.
When we step out, they fill the void, folks.
Sure.
Just because you don't hear about it and our government doesn't talk about it That's what's been going on.
And that's part of why you don't hear about it, just for the record, is because they are filling the void, right? I mean, we want to keep it quiet because, one, it's a failing of ours, and two, when your adversaries take up refuge in the places that you were taking care of, that's not exactly a good story either, right?
And it's not across the ocean.
No, and that's the big strategic component, right? I mean, yeah, it's one thing for Russia to be in the Middle East, right? I mean, yeah, we can talk about that, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's a whole other thing for them to be in Venezuela or in Cuba, right? Hello, history, right? I mean, we know what can happen when Russia's that close and in our backyard, and I don't think that any of us are big fans of that. Aside from going back to the humanitarian component, it's a bad image on the world stage, right? We're meddling over in Europe and over in the Middle East and in Asia, and we're doing these things, and that we'll talk about, but we don't want to talk about all the stuff that's happening in South America, which is closer to home and has the largest impact on the issue that supposedly as a nation is one of those top issues that we hear about all the time, which is immigration, which is just crazy. It's like, okay, so one of the issues we supposedly care about.
Stop immigration, right? This is what I was going to try to give you the lead in. So take a deep breath there, take a drink, and I'll give you the lead in. But if you're worried about immigration, one of the ways to stop immigration is to make it better in these countries that we're talking about, because then people don't want to leave, right? I mean,
sure.
Isn't that the obvious answer here? I mean, I'll play dumb. I'll try not to be too facetious here. But if we allow for there to be trouble in Central and South America in these countries, and the people don't feel safe, isn't that going to impel them to come to the United States?
I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, I think we kind of hinted at that right at the end of the last segment.
I'm trying to understand your point here, Justin, but I think I understand pretty well that if we write off Central and South America and say, we're not going to do anything about it, to your point, not only will our adversaries come in and fill the void, but then the people that and you guys know, if you listen to the show, I'm not necessarily anti-immigration, but if you are, now you're forcing those people to come to the United States by not taking care of the situations in their country if you're the United States.
Because you remember in that show, I mean, I distinctly remember, we just did that episode, right, about immigration. I distinctly remember telling people, just take a moment and think about how bad would it have to be not for you, right, but for you to be willing to send your children off on their own into a country where they may not even have any family. I mean, how bad would it have to be where you live for you to abandon your children because you honestly believe their only chance at survival, right? Forget a good life, just living is for you to let them go. I mean, it's got to be pretty bad, right? And that's what we're trying to share with you today is, look, we talked about immigration right here on the home front, but understanding why do all these people keep coming, right? I mean, yes, you can say the shining city on the hill and all this, and we can make that argument. And I do think there's a lot of them, Lance, that I'm sure come for that reason because they honestly believe, they want not just a good life, they want the best life relative to what they've had. At the same time, I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of people who are just looking for a way to live.
Many times they want to come here for a few years and make money and then go back home. Or they come here to work and send money back home and then go back home and live. They don't necessarily want to be in the United States.
It's not necessarily their plan.
They would like a place where they can live safely and comfortably with their family. And if your pets are making machine gun sounds because that's what they hear most of the time, I don't think that's a place where many of us would want to raise a family and try to carve out a living. And
even if you don't have a family, would you want to live there?
No.
I mean, especially if you have children, right? But I mean, even if you're a single individual, you want to live in a neighborhood where the animals are making sounds of machine guns because that's what they hear. And I'm sure our audience is having thoughts, Lance, right? They can send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. podcast@thestateofus.org. We want to hear from you. We read those comments.
I love to read them, folks. I mean,
Yeah.
because every once in a while you guys come up with stuff that we hadn't thought about. So we appreciate that. And sometimes you come up with things we thought about and didn't get to. And that makes us feel good because I say, yeah, we had that thought, but then we can share and make it your thought. And it's really fun, though, when you come up with stuff that we don't think about and it makes us think in our pre and post production meetings. So please let us know at the podcast at thestateofus.org.
And to find out what Lance's question is for me, you're going to have to keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Okay, here it is, folks. Changing things up. It's
You're
me.
not Justin T. Weller.
I am not Justin T. Weller. I am Lance Jackson, your friendly redneck liberal. And I'm going to ask the first question of a segment. And that is, we've talked about Venezuela, and then we talked about Peru, and we've thrown in there the overarching umbrella of immigration. And this wasn't going to be today's topic. I did all my reading. I was ready to come in and talk about something else. And Justin was all fired up. So my question to you, Justin T. Weller, is what happened that got you so fired up when you read these articles that are linked here at the State of Us that totally changed our strategy and planning of what we were going to talk about? And I'm glad we're talking about this. I think we've made some excellent points, and I think we've fulfilled our mission statement already. But what is it that angered you so much? And that was the word you used. I was angry. What was it that made you so angry that we threw out everything we had planned and did this episode today?
Well, for those people that have been listening, I'm sure they'll feel like it all goes back to this same principle, right? Of we've become, I think, because I don't think it's always been this way. I mean, I think there's a desire for people to keep life relatively simple for a lot of us because it's easier that way, right? But
well, yeah, the less I know, the less I have to worry about.
But since when is that what has made us great as a country? I cannot think of a single time in America's history where the things that we write down, the things that we say, right, these are the moments that made us a great nation. None of those were moments where we said, this is the easy path.
John Adams would not have chosen this direction, you think?
No, I don't think so.
For those of you who are new listeners to the show, John Adams is the man for Justin T. Weller.
Yeah.
And he has quite an affinity and love of John Adams, which isn't bad. I mean, if there's going to be a person that you're going to look to for guidance in American history, John Adams is a good one. But I really am trying to get you folks to understand I'm the one who gets loud and obnoxious and yells and screams on the show. Justin gives you this, I'm calm all the time. But he really is upset, folks. I mean, he's livid right now. I know you're not hearing it in his voice, but that is the reason we're doing the show today on this topic, because he was visibly shaken and upset when I came in today to do the show about this topic.
There's two we's, okay, right? There's the we, the current us, right? The people that are alive right now today in the United States. And then there's this esoteric we, the United States, from a historical standpoint. I know we, the United States, from a historical standpoint, can be better than this. Have we always been better than this? No. We've many times been worse than this, right? I mean, we can point to lots of examples where we've done some pretty awful things.
In South America.
Right. Yeah, in South America. If we want to stay on theme, we've done some pretty terrible things, really pretty much all over the globe to people of all nationalities. So in that way, I suppose we've somehow perpetuated our idea of unity, that we are equally awful to many people across the world. But the point is, we've been better than this. We have examples of being better than this, of people in this country that were better than this. And when we did great, amazing things, it's because we chose the paths that were not easy. And we are choosing as a nation, both consciously and subconsciously, to take the easy path mentally, with our news, with our politics. Because why? Because it's easy to be just a Republican or just a Democrat, right? Because I can just go to the polls and I just know how I'm going to vote, because that's easy, right? And this is not easy. This is upsetting, right? I mean, you learn these things, and I would hope that most people, even if you don't think we should be involved, are at least upset that these things are happening in the world.
Well, when you were my student, I remember we brought in a couple guest speakers, and the whole thing was, don't put people in a box. And that was the whole thing, is to learn to understand each other as a whole person, and don't, that's one reason why I take the moniker, the liberal redneck, the redneck liberal, is because it's like, wait a minute, you can't be liberal and a redneck, and friendly. I mean, that doesn't fit, right? Because you can't put me in a box. I'm a convoluted person. But you just said to me we just put people in boxes now. We just say, well, I'm a Republican, so I'm going to vote this way, or I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote this way. And
we're all okay being in those boxes.
So is that what you're telling me?
Accepting that we're in the boxes.
Is that 10 years ago, the whole mood of the country was, don't put someone in a box? And now we accept being put in a box? I mean, I don't accept it. You don't accept it.
Hopefully our listeners don't accept
it. And
the
listener, well, they probably aren't listening to us if they would accept being put in a box.
Right.
But you're saying
they tuned out.
But you're saying the majority of we.
Yeah.
The we that you
the citizenry, right,
is okay to be put in a box because of their actions.
If you walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, you've been put in a box," right? Oh no, I haven't. They're gonna, because that's the prideful American, right? I mean, even if you're not, forget if you're patriotic or not, right? I mean, especially.
That's an upcoming episode. Don't go there.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, especially this is because I was just getting the patriotic thing, and that's whatever, a right wing thing now, I guess. But this is even worse on the liberal left, right? Oh, I don't put us in boxes, but the liberal left is also the one that loves to come out with all the new labels and the wokeness and all this, which is, I know, a hot thing going on right now that we've talked about some. My point is, none of us, if confronted with, you've been put in a box, right? You are a box, right? You are basic, and you're definable and you're easy to understand. Nobody thinks of themselves that way, but we are all going along with it, right? Or many of us are going along with it because, again, it's easier. But I don't know. We got to get uncomfortable. I guess that's the best thing I've got for us, is the reason we have the lives that we have, even if you don't think they're very good. They're
yeah, but if they're not very good, why are people wanting to come here?
Exactly. That's where I'm going. It's like,
right?
It's relative, right? We are too focused on it's not good relative to what some people in our country have. What about the other way around, right? You may not have very much, but how is it in comparison to the people living in Venezuela? Because my guess is there are many of them that would literally kill another person to have your not very good life. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make your life better here in this country, but as the world's leader, we have some level of responsibility to not just continue to look the other way on issues like this, in part, if for no other reason than the strategic disadvantage of allowing it to occur.
Well, if you agree with Justin or disagree with Justin, let us know at podcast@thestateofus.org. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So that's one question. I'm going to throw out another question, and this is a little lighter, and that is, how do you like yours truly taking over the third segment? Most of you have never heard that before. Is this a good thing or not? Please weigh in on that one. Same thing. Podcast@thestateofus.org, and let us know. Maybe we need to change it up and give the friendly redneck liberal the third segment, let him ask the questions, and listen to Justin get up on his soapbox so you don't have to listen to mine. But either way, let us know what you think. Are we taking the easy way out? Are we afraid of the tough question, or not so much the tough question? Are we afraid of the tough answer? Are we afraid to get our hands dirty and do the things that are necessary to make the world a better place? Just leave me alone. I don't want to turn on the news. I don't want to read a newspaper. Just let me binge on Netflix, work at home, and stay away from other people, because that way I don't have to realize how bad the world is and what I'm not doing to make it better. Because you might say, well, I'm not doing anything to make it worse. I'm living my life. I'm going to work. I'm paying my bills. I'm doing what I'm supposed to. Okay, what are you doing to make it better? Because sins of omission are as bad as or worse than sins of commission.
Yep. We're not asking the question, Lance, because we're afraid of the answer. And that thinking did not defeat the world's greatest empire, right? That's not what led the Revolutionary War. It is not what won the Civil War. It's not what won World War I or World War II. It's not what put a man on the moon. It didn't do any of those things. And by the way, that thinking is not going to overcome climate change. Arguably, everything that I just mentioned is not going to be as difficult as figuring out how to keep our planet from dying and killing everybody on it. And if we had to do that thinking to make those things happen, what type of thinking do we have to have in order to do this? Right. So it is a matter of life and death, not just for the people in South America, but for us as a country and as a human race. We cannot think this way of, well, we're not going to ask the question because we might not like the answer.
It's a mindset, and we have to change the mindset. We have to be willing to tackle the tough questions. We have to be willing to face the tough answers. And we have to be willing to do the tough thing to get the tough job done.
Exactly. And that's why I think today, Lance, the message to people is how do you go about fixing this issue? And this isn't just, we love the state of us, but get people involved in this, whether it's you have them listen to the show or you have these conversations with them. That's what we need right now in this country, is less focus on Republican, Democrat, more focus on let's ask the question, have the conversation, and try to figure out an answer to it.
Well, that sounds like you almost gave our mission statement here.
Well, I didn't want to take that away.
Justin, no, I'm hosting
we
here.
The script. Okay.
Yeah, we're flipping it all the way through.
Oh, okay.
That is, so we have a mission statement here at True Chat. Justin, what is our mission statement?
Well, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we hope that if we've done that, or if we haven't, that you'll let us know, and that you share this, because ultimately that's how we get the word out there, right? Is we're on all these different platforms as a podcast. You can hear us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere that fine podcasts are found.
And, we're not just a podcast. We're also a syndicated radio show on the weekends. And so, not only can you get us every Tuesday and Thursday morning, do we become available as a podcast, but on weekends, we're in a lot of major markets around the country, and you need to flip on your radio dial and see if you can find us. And if your local radio station is not carrying us, call up the program director and say, why not? This is a show that our people in our city, our state, we need to hear this. So, call them up and get the show on the weekends as well. So you can have the state of us anytime you want it. Now I'm going to turn it back to Justin, because I'm way out of my league.
Yeah,
now.
You got to close it all the way out.
Here we go now. Well, for the state of us, I'm Lance Jackson.
And I'm Justin Weller.
And special thanks, as always, to our editor. Managing editor. No, he is our sound editor. No,
producer.
What are you, Bradley? Okay. Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, who makes me sound good on every show. Join us again next time. Be the change.
Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.